So which plague company are you going to marshal your legions of death and decay from? In this video we'll have a talk through the options. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the strategy focused 40k channel, where today we're talking Death Guard plague companies and distinguishing our Ferrymen from our Wretched and our Harbingers. I thought the rules for the plague companies were really quite fun when they came out originally alongside War of the Spider, and I think that Games Workshop has largely done a good job of making most of them usable with this new Death Guard Codex. In this video we'll go through each of the 7 plague companies, talk about a little of their background, and go over their unique stratagem, warlord trait and relic. At the end we'll just do a bit of a summary as to which ones I think are strongest and why. Let's jump straight into it then, and start with the first plague company, the Harbingers. So the Harbingers are the first and one of the most well-known plague companies, and also the only one that has their own unique special character in none other than Typhus the Traveller. Striking from his plague ship, the Terminus Est, the Harbingers are the spreaders of the zombie plague and all its various strains, including the walking pox. In-game, of course, they have Typhus to help sell them to you. He's essentially a very fighty Lord of Contagion, with his own special weapons and war gear, and he also gives Poxwalkers nearby a strength buff. The warlord traits for the plague companies work as contagion abilities, so it's basically an aura style ability that gets bigger and bigger as the game goes on, and Shamble Rot, the Harbinger's one, is the only one that deals direct damage. In the enemy movement phase, you roll a dice for each unit within range. On a 4+ they take a mortal wound, and on a 6 they take D3. It's certainly not bad. It's very hard to argue with direct damage that's done automatically, but to pull it off it does mean that your warlord does need to be quite close to the enemy and also not have killed them by the end of your next turn. I'd say it's not the most powerful of the warlord traits. Their relic is the Infected Remains, which could allow you to put Shamble Rot on an objective. If the person carrying it gets to an objective, then they can give it the Contagions of Nurgle ability, and it will also make use of any contagion abilities that they have themselves, so you could make an objective essentially deal damage to the enemy army if they try and hold it. This one is really quite fun, though it does mean that you'd have to get your warlord up the board really early, if you did want to actually have some decent effect from this. Finally, and in my opinion the best reason to take the Harbingers, is their stratagem, the Wrathful Dead. This one, in combination with Virulent Strain, the other Poxwalker's stratagem, can turn them into murder machines that will kill near enough anything. The Virulent Strain stratagem that all the plague companies get is the one that allows them to deal mortal wounds on all hit rolls of 6, so in a unit of 20 Poxwalkers, in theory that's up to about 6 or 7 mortal wounds just by itself. If you play this one as well though, you can re-roll all those failed hit rolls, or indeed all hit rolls that aren't a 6, and then that will go up to an average of 11 or 12 mortal wounds on your enemies, never mind the extra damage that the Poxwalkers do with their actual attacks. I just found that such a fun and scary ability that a unit of your 100-point chaff, if you invest 2 CP in them, then they can eat virtually any unit in the game alive. Realistically, I'm not sure it's a big enough draw to take the Harbingers, as it only really helps the Poxwalkers, not really anything else, but when you do get to play that combo it must be incredibly fun. Basically, if you really like zombies and want yours to be the absolute scariest around, then the Harbingers might just be the plague company for you. Next up we come to the Inexorable. These are the second plague company, and they're the plague company that excels in mechanized warfare. They have huge formations of tanks and demon engines, all of which bear the Ferric Blight, a disease of rust and decay that infests their very hulls and is liable to transfer to enemy vehicles at the slightest provocation. Entire enemy armoured divisions have been laid waste out of fighting the Inexorable, their war machines devolving into piles of scrap. Their warlord trait is this Ferric Blight itself, and it basically means that if your warlord gets up and close to the enemy units, then everything's going to be that bit easier to kill past their armour. If Inexorable units attack enemy units within contagion range of your warlord, all the attacks will be better by AP-1, whether that's bolt shots fired by Plague Marines, or the melee attacks of your warlord himself. As they go, I think this one's quite a nice offensive debuff. It's probably best with things with quite low AP, things like bolters or any of the Plague Flame weapons. It's not a bad little upgrade to your warlord's fighty attacks either. Their relic is the Leech Spore Casket, which could be fairly reasonable if you're pushing forward with a bunch of demon engines. For each enemy model that your warlord kills in melee, one of your demon engines will regain a wound within 18 inches. I'd say this one's a bit of a fire and forget type one, presuming your warlord is actually going to be getting into combat with the enemy. Provided you've got quite a lot of demon engines about, there's a good chance that you might be getting a fair few wounds back on them just by doing what you would have done anyway. Like the Harbingers though, I think the real reason to take the Inexorable is their stratagem, which is 1 CP for Ferric Miasma. This one's nice and simple. You use it when the enemy declares a charge on one of your Inexorable units, and they get -2 to that charge roll. If this one command point ever prevents a unit getting wiped out by a really fighty enemy unit, then it will be a really good command point well spent. It's perhaps best if the enemy is trying to get deep strike charges out of reserve. Typically you'd need a 9, this can make it go up to all the way to needing an 11, so almost no chance whatsoever. Overall, I think the Inexorable are really quite strong. That charge debuff alone is really handy to have, and perhaps you could justify the Leech Spore Casket if you are using a fair amount of tanks or demon engines. The third plague company is Mortarion's Anvil. These guys are defense experts, well used to digging in and repelling enemy efforts to reclaim territory that has been claimed by Mortarion. Their disease is the Gloaming Bloat, a plague of fever sweats that slicks their armor and causes them to speak in wet gurgles whenever their voices resonate over the comms waves. Rules-wise, every bit of the Mortarion's Anvil trait is really quite good, I think. The Gloaming Bloat is really quite a powerful warlord trait. Anything within contagion range can't do any hit or wound rerolls. This is definitely going to matter more depending on some armies compared with others, but for anything that's got multiple overlapping auras, things like Space Marines with captains and lieutenants, getting your warlord anywhere near them could really put a spanner in the works. For what it's worth, you also can't overwatch if you're in range either, so your warlord likely isn't going to have to worry too much if they are charging into something with a pile of guns. This one's really quite a common one to run on Mortarion himself, as he gets 9-inch contagion range and can shut down a whole portion of the enemy army's rerolls if he gets up and close. I very much like their relic as well. This really is the one that you want if you want to make a Death Guard character exceptionally fighting. The Warp Insect Hive gives you 4 rerolls both to hit and wound in melee. This really is absolutely massive, usually at least a 1/3 increase in melee power, and often much more. I strongly consider this on a Lord of Contagion who you think is going to be getting stuck into the midst of the fray, or maybe a Death Guard Demon Prince. Finally, last but by no means least, is their Stratagem, 1 command point for Relaptic Assault. Really does help characterize them as a defensive-based army, as it means that any unit can heroically intervene. Technically, the way it's written, you pick one enemy unit, and then all of your units can heroically intervene against that if it's in range, though I think the majority of the time you're still just going to be getting the one unit heroically intervening into them. In any case, this is absolutely great. It means that you could say park a big unit of Terminators on the objective, and if the opponent tries to run up to steal it away with an OBSEC unit, you can just jump into combat with them and cut them up with plague weapons. It seems very fluffy for the defense-orientated company, and I think that overall Mortarion's Anvil is a really solid plague company with lots of good options. Next up we come to the Psykers of the Legion with the Wretched. The Wretched are ruled by the foul demon, the Eater of Lives, and despite Mortarion's well-known disgust of Psykers, the Wretched must be particularly lowly in his eyes as they have far more Psykers and Sorcerers compared with the other companies. Their Warlord trait Contagion ability is the Eater Plague. This one gives another generic damage boost against enemy units, where unmodified 6s from Wretched units will auto-wound the target when they're in range. This one's going to be best combined with low strength weapons, so if you can get your Warlord up to the enemy and get units in contagion range, things like bolt guns will be getting far more wounds on very tough targets than they really should. I'd say it's a fairly small buff. It will certainly help, but maybe not by absolutely loads. Ignoring the wound roll also kind of defeats the point of plague weapons, which buff that roll in the first place. Unsurprisingly, their Relic and Stratagem are both boosts to Psykers. Their Relic is the Demon's Favour, and this makes the Torrent of Putrefaction from the Malignant Plague Caster that bit nastier. Even if they don't roll more than a 7, they still spit out 1 mortal wound from it, and if they do roll a 7 or more, then they get D3 mortal wounds in addition to their regular damage. It means that you could really have an absolute ton of mortal wound damage coming out of these guys, killing a significant amount of a unit each time they manifest. Their Stratagem is a pre-game one, and it's called the Sevenfold Blessings. Again, you can use this to buff 1 Plague Caster. It allows them to reroll 1 Psychic test per turn, so it gives them a bit more reliability when you're casting those all-important spells, and it allows you to know 1 more power out of the Contagion discipline, meaning that you're going to have more options when you're in-game. Unfortunately, it doesn't let you cast 1 more, so it's only so good, I'd say. But if you are using spells as one of the main aspects of your army that you really don't want to muck up, then game-long rerolls for just 1 CP at the start of the game could be a wise investment. Generally, I'd say that if you like Psykers, the Wretched aren't a bad choice, though I would say that they're perhaps a little bit more niche than some of the other plague companies. I'm just not sure they're as all-round strong as some of the others. Next up we come to the Poxmongers, who are the 5th plague company. In the lore they boast innumerable demon engines, carrying the plague known as the Sanguous Flux, a horrendous bleeding disorder that causes their demon engines to leave bloody snail trails behind them wherever they might go. I'm not sure I'd really want to be cleaning up after these guys. The Warlord trait, the Sanguous Flux, is unfortunately a little bit of a dud. It's a leadership debuff, and it's -1 leadership and -1 combat attrition. Honestly, it's not the worst debuff ever, but compared with some of the others which allow you to deal direct damage or kill things much easier, I'd just say it's not quite on the same level. Their relic is the Ironclot Furnace. It allows the bearer to make one demon engine have a 4+ invul save for the turn, so it has taken a bit of a big step down compared with its previous incarnation, where you could do this to all the demon engines within one aura. Now it's just one, I'd say it's not terrible, but it's not great either. If your opponent absolutely has to destroy the demon engine that's being buffed, then I'd say it's fairly strong, but if they're able to target multiple demon engines and just ignore that one, then it's really not going to do you any good. Their stratagem, Bilious Blood Rush for 1 CP, is a buff to vehicles attacking in close combat. It allows vehicles with blast weapons to fire directly into close combat as if they weren't blast, and it also gives you +1 to hit with all weapons firing within engagement range. It's going to make them very, very accurate when they're shooting at enemies next to them. I'd say the stratagem's maybe a little bit niche. I think it actually comes up more rarely than you might expect to actually want to stay in combat with a vehicle and not fall back and let the rest of your army shoot at that same unit. Even then, it's a reasonable buff giving +1 to hit, but you are really only buffing one demon engine shooting, so even then I think it's a bit of a take or leave stratagem. Again, I'd say that Poxmongers are one of the weaker play companies right now. Probably their Ironclot Furnace is the biggest reason to take them, but if you just like the idea of loads of horrible bleeding demon engines going all over the place, then maybe they're the one for you anyway. For the 6th Plague Company, we have the Ferrymen. As you can expect from their namesake, they garrison the Plague fleets and specialise in ship-to-ship boarding actions, with Terminators smashing their way in to claim Imperial vessels on behalf of Mortarion. Due to fighting in a vacuum quite a lot of the time, the Ferrymen boast a great many Terminators, who are pretty much the ideal unit that you want when fighting in brutal close-quarter actions, such as boarding actions. Their Warlord trait, the Droning, might just be one of the very best out of any of them. Enemy units that start their turn within contagion range half their movement characteristic, so you could really mess up the entire battle plans of an enemy army. Honestly, this one is absolutely great, whether you have it on Mortarion and his massive contagion range, or if you use something like a Bloat Drone and Flash Outbreak to deliver it right up to the enemy very early in the game. It could really cause your opponents a nasty surprise when they realise that their army has suddenly become even slower than the Death Guard that they're fighting. Their relic is the Ferryman's Scythe. It's a Man Reaper that gets 3 times as many hits when it's on Scythe mode, rather than getting the normal 2. Makes it exceptionally good against fighting hordes or anything with a -1 damage characteristic when you might be wanting to swing with the lesser profile anyway. Finally, their stratagem is on Droning Wings for 1 CP. This one gives them +6 inches to the aura ability of one of their feated Virion members. Maybe could be an interesting one for one with a really low aura ability, such as the Plague Surgeon, to get that feel no pain all over the place. That seems like it might be one of the best uses to me. For me, I'd say the main reason to run the Ferryman is to get access to the Droning Warlord trait, though getting a situational extra boost to Virion auras could be pretty handy too. Finally, last but by no means least, we have Mortarion's Chosen Sons. The 7th Plague Company are specialists in the dark craft of alchemy, and earn their diseased Primarch's favour by crafting ever new plagues, diseases and poisons to inflict on the enemy armies. When they make war, it's with a great amount of biological weapons, and they're not a plague company that I particularly want to be fighting. Their warlord trait is Nurgle's Fruit. This disease of boils and pustules again makes enemy units even easier to kill. It'll give your warriors ranged attacks ignore cover against anyone who's claiming it when they are in range of this contagion. I'm afraid I just wouldn't say that this is the best one. Cover at best usually means a +1 to your armor saving throw. It's pretty much inferior to the Inexorables one that just gives you an extra pip of AP against everything, whether or not they're in cover. I'd say my favourite reason to take these is the relic Vomitrix, which is a relic plague sprayer for a foul blight spawn. Usually these disturbing flamers get D6 attacks, but this one just gets an assault 7 auto hit attack. In normal terms, that's just going to mean it's around about twice as dangerous. Honestly, those plague sprayers already pack a big punch already, so getting essentially twice the amount of damage out of one is a really good deal. Finally, their stratagem is 1 CP for Plague Brewers, and it makes Plague Flame weapons, things like Plague Burst Gauntlets and Plague Sprayers, they all become damaged too when you use this stratagem. I guess it's probably best used on a big unit of Death Shroud Terminators or with Plague Spurt Gauntlets, but even then it's not super overwhelming. It might be a bit better if you're fighting 2-wound infantry, such as Primaris Marines. Overall, I mainly just choose this plague company if you absolutely want to melt people, with Vomitrix the Super Plague Sprayer. So overall, in terms of army strength at the moment, I would put them like this. My favourite 3 are the Inexorable, Mortarion's Anvil and the Ferrymen. The Inexorable for a decent-ish plague trait, plus also their excellent stratagem to get in the way of charges. The Ferrymen purely for that excellent the droning trait, and Mortarion's Anvil, as they're just all round strong, their warlord trait, relic and stratagem are all really usable. If I had to put down which one I think is the single strongest, it would be Mortarion's Anvil right now. I describe the Harbingers as maybe a little bit more limited, though personally I still just really like the idea of their Super Poxwalker combo. They don't do an absolute ton for most of the army, but just being able to put out 11 or 12 wounds with one unit of 100-point chaff is absolutely crazy, and to mean that your opponent would genuinely have to fear your Poxwalkers as some of the primary damage dealers of the army. Finally, the ones that I don't think are quite as strong are Mortarion's Chosen Sons, the Wretched and the Poxmongers. They still all have their uses. Mortarion's Chosen Sons have that excellent Plague Sprayer, the Wretched are good for Psychers, and the Poxmongers can make a Demon Engine really hard to kill, but I'd say that these buffs just aren't quite as strong or a little bit more niche to certain units. What's your favourite of the Plague companies and why? I look forward to hearing your thoughts and opinions down in the comments. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics. I'll certainly be hoping to make a fair few more Death Guard videos, so stay tuned if you'd like to see that. Finally, if you have been enjoying the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that I do have a Patreon page, which you can find down in the video description. Making all these videos, particularly long comparison ones like this, does take a fair amount of time, and if you are enjoying regularly, then any support is massively appreciated. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages. You get to see certain videos early, there's regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and you also get automatic entry to the monthly prize giveaways with a chance to win some really big model kits. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.